7.5, unit circle approach, properties of the trigonometric functions. And by the way, that was one of my cats. I don't know if you heard him or not, but he meowed as soon as I hit the record button. Anyways, remember that the radius of the unit circle is 1. So sine corresponds to your y coordinate, and that cosine corresponds to your x coordinate. So just write this up, cosine, comma, sine. That is our coordinate point. Okay? All right. So I think we've seen this page before, but written out a little bit differently. If you remember, sine was basically written as y over r. Now that the radius is 1, sine is just y. So cosine was written as x over r, so it's just written as x. And tangent is now y over x because it's sine over cosine. So just as a quick reminder, cosecant, remember, is the reciprocal function of sine, so it's 1 over y. And secant is the reciprocal function of cosine, so it's 1 over x. Okay, this last one says cotangent, so that's going to be cosine over sine. That's going to be x over y. All right, now that we know that information or had a review of it again, I'm going to show you what's called the unit circle. So the unit circle, I'm going to write this a little bit smaller. The unit circle is exactly what it sounds like. It is a circle, and it is broken up into 4 regions. And the 4 regions depend on the value. So we have 0, which is 0 degrees and 0 radians. And then we have 180 degrees, which is, sorry, I'm putting on the wrong thing. It should be 90 degrees. Hopefully you guys caught that and said, no, no, no. 90 degrees, that is pi over 2. 180 degrees is pi. 270 degrees is 3 pi over 2. And then finally back around, 360 is 2 pi. Okay, so we already have the values at those points. Remember, we wrote those out. This point, because the radius is 1, is 1, 0. This point up here is 0, 1. This point over here is a negative 1, 0. And this point down here is 0, negative 1. So just as a reminder to what those values were, because we need them. So I'm just going to put this as 0 and negative 1, just so I have more room. Okay, so we have to fill out the rest of this. Everybody hopefully remembers the 30-degree angles. Okay, so the reference angles in all 4 quadrants would look like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put 30 degrees on here. Now remember that in quadrant 2, if we want to get the reference angle, we had to subtract the angle from 180. So if you take 180 minus 30, that's going to give us that 150 degrees. Okay, now remember, I'm doing all the reference angles of 30 degrees, right? I should say the pre-reference angles. So now if I add 30 to 180, I'm going to get the quadrant 3 angle, which is 210. Okay, and finally in quadrant 4, I'm going to take 360 minus 30, and I'm going to get 330. Okay, now we have to deal with the pi over 6, because you're going to be asked to do this in both radians and in degrees. So pi over 6 is equivalent to 30 degrees. In quadrant 2, remember that pi is 6 pi over 6. So if I subtract 1 from that, because that's pi over 6, I get 5 pi over 6. So it's 1 less than the denominator. Okay? And in quadrant 3, once again, I have the denominator of 6 because it's a 30-degree angle. I'm going to add pi over 6 to 6 pi over 6 to get 7 pi over 6. So quadrant 3 is 1 more than whatever the denominator is. And in quadrant 4, I have 2 pi. So 2 pi with a denominator of 6 is going to be 12 pi over 6 minus 1 is 11 pi over 6. So you double the denominator minus 1 to get the radian value at that point. Okay, we need the values. So in order to get the values, you're going to need your 30, 60, 90 triangle and also the 45, 45. And that'll take care of the whole unit circle. Okay, so remember we're writing things up as cosine, comma, sine. Okay, so cosines first. What is cosine at 30 degrees? Cosine at 30 degrees is radical 3 over 2. What is sine at 30 degrees? It's 1/2. Okay, so all the values for 30 degrees are going to be the same, except for the sines. And I'll get to those in a moment. I'm just writing all these values in really fast. Okay, now we're going to rely upon all students take calculus to figure out what the sines. In quadrant 1, the sines are both positive, so I'm not touching them. Now I'm in quadrant 2. In quadrant 2, cosine is negative and sine is positive. So I need to attach a negative sign, and I'm doing this really dark. I'm going to rewrite this really quick. I'm going to attach a negative sign in front of negative 3 over 2. Okay? All right. In quadrant 3, both sine and cosine are negative. So I'm going to attach a negative sign in front of both negative 3 pi over 2 and negative 1/2. Okay? In quadrant 4, cosine is positive, but sine is negative, so I have to attach a negative in front of 1/2. Okay? I'm good now. Now I have to go and check out the 45-degree angle. So here's 45 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and write that out. So once again, I have to do all the pre-reference angles, meaning let's figure out what those are. All right, so 180 less 45 is 135. It's 125. I lied to you. That's why I paused for a moment, because I was like, I don't think that's right. So let me go ahead and erase what I just wrote that. Sorry about that, guys. Once again, it's 125. Bad mathematics. Okay, so 180 plus 45 is 225. And 360 minus 45 is 315. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the radian values of that. Actually, you know what? I was right. It is 135. Jeez Louise. I would make this video over, but I'm kind of short on time, so sorry about that for changing it once again. Okay, 45 degrees is pi over 4. 135 degrees, remember we subtract from the denominator. The denominator is 4, so subtract 1 from that, I get 3 pi over 4. Okay, for 225, I add 1 to the denominator. So the denominator is 4, so this becomes 5 pi over 4. And at 315, I'm going to double the denominator minus 1. So double 4, you get 8, minus 1, you get 7. So this becomes 7 pi over 4. Okay, now I need my values. So I need to find out what sine and cosine are at 45 degrees. And hopefully you're saying it's radical 2 over 2 for cosine and radical 2 over 2 for sine. So go ahead and put those values in the unit circle here. And leave spaces for negative signs, because once again we got to do that as well. Okay, so in quadrant 2, remember that cosine is negative, so I'm going to attach negatives on the first one. In quadrant 3, both cosine and sine are negative, and in quadrant 4, sine is negative, cosine's positive. Okay, we got one more to do, that's 60 degrees. getting kind of cramped in here. So let me go ahead and put the pre-reference angles in there. Okay, so 60 degrees, we do the same trick to find the other one. So 180 less 60 is 120. 60 plus 180 is 240. And 360 minus 60 is 300. Okay, now the radians. Pi over 3 is equivalent to 60 degrees. So in quadrant 2, you take the denominator minus 1. So that's 2 pi over 3. In quadrant 3, you add 1. So it's going to be 4 pi over 3. And then in quadrant 4, you double the denominator minus 1. So doubling 3, we get 6, minus 1, we get 5 pi over 3. Okay, now we just need some values. So what is the value at 60 degrees of cosine? The value at 60 degrees of cosine is 1/2, and sine is radical 3 over 2. Okay, so once again, I'm just putting in the values. 1/2 radical 3 over 2. 1/2 radical 3 over 2. And 1/2 radical 3 over 2. Okay, so in quadrant 4, sine is negative. In quadrant 2, both are negative. Or sorry, in quadrant 3, both are negative. And in quadrant 2, sine is negative. Okay, so this is what the unit circle looks like on your test and on the quiz you guys will have. You have to be able to fill out this whole entire thing with both the radians and degrees, and also every single value I just showed you. So I'm just letting you know that will be on the test and on a quiz, so make sure you know how to do it.